The Galactic Council had seen many species rise and fall across the stars. They had witnessed civilizations that conquered death itself, others that bent reality to their will, and some that could travel between dimensions as easily as walking through a door. But none of them had prepared the Council for humanity. Admiral Zextar of the Regellian fleet adjusted his breathing apparatus nervously as he studied the latest reports from the Outer Rim territories. 3 entire star systems had gone dark in the past solar cycle. Not destroyed, not conquered, simply quiet. The automated distress beacons had stopped transmitting, trade routes had been abandoned, and every attempt at communication had been met with silence. Admiral, his aide, Lieutenant Korth, approached with visible tension in his crystalline features. "The Council demands answers. The hegemony is threatening to mobilize their war fleets if we cannot explain what happened to their mining colonies." Zextar's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of deep contemplation among his people. "Have we received any response from our reconnaissance probes?" "That's the strange part, sir. The probes return with full data streams, but—" Korth paused, his translator struggling with the concept. "The planets show signs of massive population increases, not decreases. Energy readings are off the charts, but in patterns we've never seen before." "Impossible. Our intelligence networks confirmed that the human expansion had reached those systems. Humans are a Category 7 species, minimal technology, prone to violence, average intelligence. They couldn't possibly sustain large populations without our detection." What neither Zextar nor the Galactic Council understood was that they had fundamentally misclassified humanity. Their evaluation protocols, designed over millions of years of contact with hundreds of species, had one critical flaw. They measured civilization by their own standards of logic, efficiency, and predictable behavior patterns. They had no category for a species that considered, because it would be awesome, a valid reason for undertaking massive engineering projects. Captain Sarah Chen of the UES Curiosity stood on the bridge of humanity's first deep space exploration vessel, watching the sensor readings with barely contained excitement. 6 months ago, they had discovered not just alien life, but an entire galactic community that had somehow missed Earth during their surveys. The revelation that humanity was considered primitive by galactic standards had been initially insulting, then hilarious, and finally inspiring. "Captain, we're receiving another transmission from that Rigelian scout ship," reported Communications Officer Rodriguez. "Same as before. They're demanding we submit to immediate cultural evaluation and technological assessment." Sarah grinned, the expression that had become legendary among her crew for preceding their most ambitious projects. "Tell them we're a little busy right now. We're in the middle of something important. What humanity was in the middle of was the largest practical joke in galactic history, though they hadn't exactly planned it that way. It had started innocently enough." Dr. Marcus Webb, the expedition's lead xenobiologist, had been studying the abandoned Zephyrian colony on Kepler 438b when he made a discovery that changed everything. The Zephyrians, a highly logical species known for their efficiency, had built their entire colony around principles of maximum resource utilization and minimal energy expenditure. It was, by galactic standards, a perfect example of intelligent colonization. It was also, by human standards, the most boring place in the universe. "Look at this," Webb had explained to Captain Chen during his initial briefing, gesturing at the perfectly geometric structures that comprise the former colony. "Every building is exactly the optimal size for its function. Every street is the shortest possible distance between necessary points. Every resource is allocated according to strict mathematical formulas for sustainability. It's like they took all the fun out of existing," Chen had replied, and that single comment had sparked what became known as the Great Human Renovation Project. Within weeks, the abandoned Zephyrian colony had been transformed. Humans had descended upon it like a force of creative chaos, armed with nothing more than basic construction equipment, unlimited imagination, and a complete disregard for optimal efficiency. The perfectly logical transportation grid was replaced with a maze of roller coasters that happened to connect all the important locations. The standardized housing units were rebuilt as treehouses, underground burrows, floating platforms, and one particularly ambitious structure that resembled a giant robot. The efficient food production facilities were converted into elaborate gardens where vegetables were grown in artistic patterns that could be seen from orbit. And that was just the beginning. The humans had discovered that the Zephyrians' mining operation had barely scratched the surface of the planet's resources, not because the resources weren't accessible, but because the Zephyrians had calculated that deeper mining would be inefficient given their projected population growth. Humans looked at the same calculations and said, "Hold our beer." Within 3 months, they had established what they called the Underground Amusement Park, a vast network of tunnels, caverns, and underground chambers that served simultaneously as mining operation, transportation network, and the galaxy's first subterranean theme park. Mineral extraction was accomplished through elaborate games and competitions. Transportation through the tunnels was provided by water slides, zip lines, and what the humans cheerfully called controlled avalanche surfing. The energy output from their operations exceeded Zephyrian efficiency by 300%, not through better technology, but through the simple application of human enthusiasm. When work became play, productivity became limitless. But the real confusion began when humanity encountered their first inhabited alien settlement. The crystalline collective of Vega Prime was a peaceful trading post, home to several thousand beings from a dozen different species. It was efficiently run, logically organized, and absolutely crucial to trade routes throughout the sector. It was also, in the collective human opinion, desperately in need of livening up. The humans didn't conquer Vega Prime. They didn't even attempt to claim it or establish dominance. Instead, they did something far more terrifying to the galactic mindset. They threw a party. The Festival of First Contact, as it came to be known, lasted for 3 weeks and fundamentally altered the social structure of an entire star system. Humans introduced concepts that most alien species had never encountered: celebration for its own sake, recreational activities with no productive purpose, and the revolutionary idea that sometimes inefficiency was more fun. The crystalline collective's rigid work schedules were disrupted by humans organizing spontaneous dance competitions in the trading halls. The carefully maintained atmospheric controls were adjusted to create weather for the first time in the station's history. Gentle rain showers that served no purpose except that humans enjoyed walking in them. Most shocking of all, the humans introduced the concept of vacation. For species that measured success by productivity and efficiency, the idea that intelligent beings would voluntarily reduce their output for the purpose of relaxation was incomprehensible. When human tourists began arriving from other systems, not to trade or establish colonies, but simply to see the sights, it caused a philosophical crisis among several species. The logical hegemony of Arcturus, known for their strict adherence to rational decision-making, sent a diplomatic mission to investigate these vacation activities. The entire delegation returned 6 weeks later, having learned to surf, mastered something called karaoke, and possessing an inexplicable desire to restructure their society around a concept they struggled to translate but kept referring to as fun. Admiral Zextar received these reports with growing alarm. According to every intelligence metric the Galactic Council possessed, humanity was in the process of conquering the galaxy. They were spreading rapidly, establishing influence over strategic locations, and somehow convincing other species to adopt human behavioral patterns. The terrifying part was that they seemed to be doing it accidentally. "Admiral?" Lieutenant Korth's voice interrupted his thoughts. "We're receiving a priority transmission from the Vegan Trade Authority. They're requesting permission to implement something called Casual Friday in their commercial districts." Zextar's breathing apparatus wheezed in what might have been panic. "Send a message to the Council. Tell them we need to accelerate our timeline for contact with the human leadership. Whatever they're doing, it's spreading faster than we anticipated." What the Admiral didn't understand was that humanity's conquest of the galaxy wasn't a military campaign or even a deliberate expansion strategy. It was simply what happened when a species that had evolved the capacity for joy encountered a universe that had forgotten how to have fun. On the human colony ship Endeavour, Dr. Jennifer Walsh was reviewing the psychological evaluation reports from their interactions with various alien species. As the mission's chief xenopsychologist, she was tasked with understanding why their presence seemed to have such a profound effect on galactic civilization. "It's remarkable," she explained to Captain Chen during their daily briefing. "These species have achieved incredible technological advancement, but they've somehow optimized the joy out of existence. They measure everything by efficiency, productivity, and logical outcome. They've created societies where no one knows how to play." "So what happens when they encounter humans?" Chen asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "They remember what they've been missing, or maybe they discover it for the first time. Either way, once they experience what we consider normal social interaction, they can't go back to their previous way of life." The proof of Dr. Walsh's theory was evident in every system humanity had visited. The rigid hierarchies of the Galactic Council were beginning to develop cracks as individual species requested cultural exchange programs with human settlements. Trade efficiency was declining as alien merchants spent increasing amounts of time engaging in what humans called small talk, and aliens were beginning to term social bonding rituals. Most concerning for the established galactic order, several species had begun questioning the fundamental assumption that maximum efficiency equaled maximum happiness. The breaking point came when humanity made contact with the Eternal Archive, a vast library ship that had spent millennia collecting and preserving the knowledge of extinct civilizations. The archive was staffed by the Keepers, a species so dedicated to the preservation of information that they had evolved beyond the need for physical form, existing as pure consciousness within their crystalline data networks. The Keepers were the ultimate expression of logical civilization, beings who had transcended physical limitations to become living repositories of galactic knowledge. They were respected throughout the galaxy for their wisdom, feared for their vast understanding of historical patterns, and consulted by the Council on all matters of galactic significance. They were also, as one human visitor observed, really, really lonely. The human archaeological team that boarded the archive had come seeking historical data about Earth's galactic neighbors. They left having taught the Keepers how to play poker. Within a week, the most ancient and revered beings in the galaxy were hosting game nights, organizing talent shows, and experiencing emotions they hadn't felt in thousands of years. The Keeper known as Prime Archive, who had maintained silent vigil over galactic history for 5 millennia, was discovered by a council inspection team teaching a group of young Keepers how to perform something called stand-up comedy. The philosophical implications were staggering. If beings of pure logic and infinite wisdom could be so profoundly affected by human social customs, what did that say about the nature of consciousness itself? What did it say about the direction galactic civilization had been heading? More immediately, what did it say about humanity's potential threat to the established order? Admiral Zextar stood before the assembled Galactic Council, his report hologram displaying the latest intelligence from human-contacted systems. The data was undeniable. Wherever humans established a presence, productivity initially decreased, social structures became less rigid, and species began exhibiting unprecedented levels of what human scientists termed happiness. "The threat is unlike anything we've encountered," Zexatar reported to the assembled representatives. "They don't conquer through superior technology or military force. They don't even seem to be aware they're causing these changes. They simply exist among other species and somehow cause fundamental alterations in social behavior patterns." Counselor Vresh of the hegemony raised a crystalline appendage. "What are their demands? What do they want in exchange for reversing these changes?" "That's the problem," Zextar admitted. "They don't appear to want anything. When we've attempted to initiate formal diplomatic contact, they respond with invitations to what they call barbecues and requests to know if we like to party." A murmur of confusion rippled through the council chambers. The concept of inviting potential enemies to social gatherings was so foreign to galactic diplomatic tradition that most species lacked words to describe it. "Perhaps," suggested Counselor Thex of the Archive Authority, "we should consider the possibility that their intentions are genuinely non-hostile." The suggestion was met with silence. In a galaxy where every species had earned their place through competition, conquest, or strategic alliance, the idea of a species that sought contact purely for social interaction was more unsettling than outright warfare. After all, they could understand an enemy, but how do you negotiate with someone who just wants to be friends? As the Council debated humanity's threat level, Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Curiosity, watching a group of human children play zero-gravity tag with a pod of crystalline beings who had emerged from the nearby asteroid mining facility. The alien workers had initially been confused by the concept of recess, but had quickly adapted to the idea of taking breaks from mining operations to engage in recreational activities. "Captain," Dr. Walsh joined her at the observation window, "I've been thinking about our impact on galactic civilization. Are we doing the right thing? We're fundamentally changing societies that have existed for thousands of years." Sarah watched as one of the human children taught a massive, rock-like mineraloid how to perform a somersault in zero gravity. The ancient being's crystalline laughter created harmonics that resonated through the ship's hull like music. "Jenny," Sarah said quietly, "look at them. When's the last time you saw any intelligent being laugh like that?" Dr. Walsh considered the question seriously. In all their encounters with alien species, she had observed curiosity, logic, fear, ambition, and countless other emotions. But spontaneous joy, laughter for its own sake, those seemed to be uniquely human contributions to the galaxy. "Maybe we're not changing them," she said finally. "Maybe we're just reminding them of something they forgot along the way." Neither of them noticed the small reconnaissance drone that had been observing their interaction, or the way its sensors had recorded their conversation for transmission back to Admiral Zexatar's fleet. The galaxy was about to learn that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology, strategy, or even their infamous adaptability. It was their absolute inability to take themselves too seriously, and some weapons, once deployed, could never be contained. Admiral Zextar had expected many things when the Galactic Council authorized first formal contact with humanity. He had prepared for difficult negotiations, potential hostility, or even submission to superior alien technology. What he had not prepared for was being invited to participate in something called a beach volleyball tournament. The human delegation had arrived at the neutral meeting station of Nexus Prime in a ship that, by all technical specifications, should not have been able to fly. Its hull was covered in colorful paintings that served no defensive or efficiency purpose. Strange protrusions that humans called decorations added unnecessary weight and wind resistance. Most puzzling of all, the ship's exterior featured what appeared to be windows specifically designed for observation rather than tactical advantage. Commander Lisa Rodriguez, humanity's chief diplomatic officer, greeted the assembled alien delegates with a smile that displayed her teeth, a gesture that most species interpreted as either a threat display or a sign of mental instability. "Welcome to the party," she announced, apparently unaware that formal diplomatic protocols required careful ceremonial procedures. "We've set up activities for everyone. Who wants to try the swimming pool?" Counselor Vresh of the Hegemony consulted his cultural database frantically. Swimming was listed as a survival technique practiced by several species, but the idea of voluntarily submerging oneself in water for pleasure was not referenced in any known civilization. "Commander Rodriguez," Admiral Zextar stepped forward, his voice carefully modulated through his universal translator. "We have come to discuss the serious matter of your species' impact on galactic stability. Perhaps we could proceed with formal negotiations?" Rodriguez tilted her head, another gesture that caused several security officers to reach for their weapons. "Sure, we can talk while we play. Some of the best conversations happen during games. Have you ever tried mini-golf?" Before Zextar could respond, a group of human technicians wheeled out what appeared to be a series of small obstacles, artificial landscapes, and geometric challenges. Within minutes, they had constructed an elaborate course that seemed to serve no purpose other than attempting to hit a small ball into various holes using primitive clubs. "The objective," explained Dr. Marcus Webb, who had been assigned as humanity's cultural liaison, "is to get the ball in the hole using as few strokes as possible. But the real fun comes from the obstacles and the conversation along the way." Counselor Thex of the Archive Authority studied the course with the intensity of a military strategist. "What resources are gained through successful completion of this challenge?" "None," Webb replied cheerfully. "That's kind of the point. It's just fun." The concept hit the assembled delegates like a psychic shockwave, an activity that consumed time, energy, and resources while producing no measurable benefit. It violated every principle of evolutionary development they understood. "Perhaps," suggested Counselor Vresh nervously, "we could observe this mini-golf activity to better understand human culture." What followed was the most surreal diplomatic encounter in galactic history. Admiral Zextar, whose species had conquered 17 star systems through tactical brilliance, found himself crouched behind a windmill attempting to calculate the optimal trajectory for a golf ball. His 4 eyes tracked the rotating blades with military precision, computing angles and timing with the same intensity he brought to space battles. "Don't overthink it," advised Rodriguez, who was demonstrating the proper stance. "Sometimes you just have to feel the shot." "Feel the shot?" Zextar's translator struggled with the concept. "Are you suggesting I should ignore mathematical calculation in favor of intuitive assessment?" "Exactly. Trust your instincts." This suggestion was so fundamentally opposed to Rigelian philosophy that Zextar experienced what humans might have recognized as an existential crisis. His people had evolved beyond instinct millions of years ago, replacing primitive impulses with logical analysis and calculated decision-making. Yet when he finally struck the ball, following Rodriguez's advice to just let it happen, it sailed perfectly through the windmill's rotating blades and dropped directly into the hole. The humans erupted in cheers and applause. Several alien delegates jumped in surprise at the sudden noise, reaching for weapons that weren't there. But Zextar felt something he had never experienced before. A warm sensation that spread through his breathing apparatus, accompanied by an involuntary movement of his facial muscles that his species had no name for. He was smiling. Counselor Thex, meanwhile, was engaged in what humans would recognize as trash talk with Dr. Webb. The ancient archive keeper, whose consciousness spanned millennia of accumulated knowledge, was arguing passionately about the aerodynamics of golf ball dimples while attempting to bank a shot off a plastic dinosaur. "Your theory is flawed," Thex insisted, his crystalline form flickering with agitation. "The optimal angle of approach clearly requires consideration of rotational velocity in relation to surface friction." "Maybe," Webb replied, lining up his own shot, "but you're forgetting the dinosaur factor." "The what?" Webb's ball ricocheted off the plastic dinosaur's tail, bounced off two walls, and somehow ended up closer to the hole than Thex's perfectly calculated shot. "Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor," Webb explained. "The dinosaur factor is when silly things happen that make the game more interesting." This explanation caused Thex to experience something unprecedented in his species' evolution. He laughed. The sound was unlike anything the other delegates had heard, a resonant chiming that seemed to harmonize with the station's ambient frequencies. Other keepers throughout the galaxy, connected through their quantum consciousness network, suddenly experienced an echo of unfamiliar joy. Within hours, archive keepers across 17 systems were requesting detailed specifications for mini-golf course construction. But the real breakthrough came when Counselor Vresh attempted the water hazard. The hegemony representative approached the small artificial pond with the caution his people typically reserved for entering hostile territory. His crystalline structure was designed to be impervious to most environmental challenges, but water posed unique risks to his species' electrical nervous system. "I cannot risk contact with the liquid," he explained to the humans. "My physiology is incompatible with this challenge." Rodriguez studied the problem for a moment, then disappeared into the human ship. She returned with what appeared to be a clear, flexible membrane. "Waterproofing," she announced. "We use this stuff for all kinds of activities. It'll keep you dry while still letting you play." As she helped Vresh apply the protective covering, she chattered casually about Earth's various weather patterns, humanity's long relationship with water sports, and her personal record for underwater basket weaving. The hegemony counselor found himself fascinated not by the information itself, but by the way Rodriguez shared it. There was no strategic purpose to her conversation, no attempt to gain advantage or establish dominance. She was simply talking, sharing experiences for the apparent pleasure of communication itself. When Vresh successfully completed the water hazard, he experienced something his species had lost millions of years ago: the satisfaction of overcoming a challenge purely for personal achievement. Not for resources, not for tactical advantage, not even for knowledge. Just because it had been difficult and he had succeeded. The revelation was profound. His people had become so focused on efficient resource acquisition that they had forgotten the simple pleasure of accomplishment. "Commander Rodriguez," he said carefully, "your species engages in these activities regularly?" "Oh yeah, we love games. Golf, volleyball, chess, video games, sports, puzzles, competitions, festivals. Humans will turn almost anything into an opportunity for fun. And this provides evolutionary advantage?" Rodriguez considered the question seriously. "Not directly, I guess, but it makes us happy. And happy people are more creative, more cooperative, more resilient. Maybe fun isn't just recreation. Maybe it's how we stay human." The implications of this conversation rippled through the diplomatic gathering like a philosophical earthquake. If recreational activities served a legitimate biological and social function, then the entire foundation of galactic civilization might be based on a fundamental misunderstanding of intelligent development. Admiral Zexitar, who had been listening while practicing his putting technique, found himself facing an uncomfortable realization. His own people, the mighty Rigelians, had built their empire on principles of logic and efficiency. They had eliminated wasteful activities, optimized every aspect of their society, and created a civilization that functioned like a perfectly calibrated machine. They had also, he was beginning to understand, created a civilization where no one actually enjoyed being alive. "Commander Rodriguez," he said slowly, "would it be possible for my people to learn these games?" The smile she gave him in response was brighter than most star systems. "Zex, my friend," she said, and the casual use of his shortened name sent another cultural shock through the alien delegates. "That's exactly what we were hoping you'd ask." What followed was 3 days of the most productive diplomatic negotiations in galactic history, conducted entirely through recreational activities. The trade agreement between humanity and the Regellian fleet was finalized during a game of laser tag that took place throughout the station's maintenance tunnels. Admiral Zextar discovered that his tactical experience translated surprisingly well to recreational combat scenarios, while the humans demonstrated an alarming ability to turn any environment into an advantageous position. The cultural exchange protocols were established during a talent show that featured Counselor Thex performing what could only be described as crystalline interpretive dance, while humans attempted to recreate traditional keeper harmonic frequencies using something called a kazoo orchestra. The Mutual Defense Pact was signed while both species attempted to solve a massive jigsaw puzzle that depicted Earth's solar system as seen from Regellian space. The collaborative effort required each group to share their perspective to complete the picture, creating an unintentional metaphor for interspecies cooperation. Most importantly, the question of humanity's threat level was resolved during a simple card game. Counselor Vresh had challenged Dr. Webb to a game of poker, insisting that his people's logical nature would provide an insurmountable advantage. The game quickly became a philosophical discussion about the nature of strategy, uncertainty, and decision-making under incomplete information. "Your species relies heavily on logical analysis," Webb observed, studying his cards. "But poker isn't really about logic. It's about reading people, managing risk, and knowing when to take chances." "Explain," Vresh requested, his crystalline features reflecting the colored lights of the game table. "Well, right now you're trying to calculate the mathematical probability of my hand based on the cards that have been played, but you're missing the more important information." "Which is?" Webb grinned and laid down his cards, a completely mediocre hand that shouldn't have won anything. "I was bluffing the entire time. The cards don't matter as much as the story you tell with them." Vresh stared at the cards in what humans might have recognized as confusion. "You lied about the strength of your position?" "I created an alternative narrative that was more compelling than reality. That's kind of humanity's specialty." It was Counselor Thex who grasped the implications first. "Your species has mastered the art of beneficial deception. You can construct shared fictional frameworks that produce positive outcomes for all participants." "We call it playing together," Webb said simply. "Sometimes the best way to solve real problems is to approach them as if they're games." This concept revolutionized galactic understanding of human psychology. Humans weren't conquering other species through superior technology or strategy. They were doing something far more sophisticated. They were reframing the fundamental nature of interaction itself. Instead of approaching other species as competitors, resources, or threats, humans treated them as potential playmates. The entire galaxy had been operating under the assumption that intelligent contact must inevitably lead to conflict, dominance, or submission. Humans had introduced a fourth option: collaboration for mutual enjoyment. Admiral Zextar found himself facing a choice that would define the future of galactic civilization. He could report back to the Council that humanity represented a threat to the established order, which was technically true. Their presence was causing species throughout the galaxy to question fundamental assumptions about efficiency, productivity, and the purpose of civilization itself. Or he could recommend that the Council consider the possibility that humanity represented an opportunity to evolve beyond those assumptions. As he watched Commander Rodriguez teaching a group of young Rigelians how to play a game called Capture the Flag, he realized that the choice had already been made. His people's rigid dedication to logic and efficiency had given them a powerful military and advanced technology. But it had also given them a society where children rarely laughed. "Commander," he approached Rodriguez as the game wound down, "I need to ask you something important. What is your species' ultimate goal in galactic expansion?" Rodriguez paused in her explanation of flag-capturing strategy to consider the question. "I guess we want to meet new people, learn new things, and share what we've learned. Maybe help others discover what makes life worth living. And if other species are not interested in these shared activities, then we respect their choice and remain friends anyway. Not everyone has to like the same games." Zexitar's breathing apparatus wheezed in what he was learning to recognize as laughter. "You realize that your definition of success makes conquest pointless?" "Exactly." Rodriguez's enthusiasm was infectious. "Why would we want to rule over people who aren't having fun? That sounds like a terrible way to spend eternity." That evening, Admiral Zexitar composed his report to the Galactic Council. It was unlike any diplomatic assessment in the archives and would be studied by xenopsychologists for generations. "The human species poses no military threat to galactic security," he wrote. "They possess adequate technology for self-defense, but show no interest in territorial expansion or resource acquisition beyond their immediate needs. Their colonial efforts focus primarily on what they term quality of life improvements, rather than strategic advantage. However, they do represent a fundamental challenge to current galactic civilization. Their social customs, if adopted widely, would result in decreased productivity, reduced efficiency, and significant alterations to established power structures. They would also result in populations that are healthier, more creative, more resilient, and significantly happier than current galactic standards." This officer recommends immediate implementation of cultural exchange programs with humanity, with particular focus on understanding their recreational and social customs. "We have much to learn from a species that has mastered the art of enjoying existence." Personal note: I have experienced what humans call fun and can confirm that it is highly addictive. I am already planning my next visit to human space for something they call a barbecue. Apparently, it involves the deliberate burning of food for social purposes. I find myself inexplicably excited by this prospect. End report. As Zexitar transmitted his assessment to the Council, he had no idea that it would spark the largest philosophical revolution in galactic history. Within a year, species throughout the galaxy would be debating the relative merits of efficiency versus enjoyment. Traditional power structures would begin adapting to accommodate recreational periods. Ancient species would rediscover laughter, and humanity, blissfully unaware that they had started a revolution, would continue doing exactly what they had always done, finding new ways to have fun and sharing them with anyone who was interested. The galaxy would never be the same. More importantly, it would never want to go back. 6 months after Admiral Zexitar's report reached the Galactic Council, the galaxy faced its first recreational crisis. The problem began on Centauri Station, the largest trade hub in the Outer Rim. What had once been a model of efficient commerce, species conducting business with minimal social interaction, optimal resource allocation, and predictable economic patterns, had transformed into something the station's AI systems could no longer classify. Station Administrator Quell of the Thermal Aggregates stood in what had once been Docking Bay 94, staring at a site that defied every principle of commercial space management. The bay had been converted into what humans called a beach volleyball court, complete with imported sand, artificial gravity adjustments to simulate ocean waves, and a massive holographic sun that provided no practical illumination but somehow made everyone feel warmer. "Report status," Quell commanded his assistant, trying to ignore the sounds of laughter echoing from the recreational area. "Sir," Assistant Manager Vrix consulted his data tablet with visible confusion. "Productivity in this sector is down 37%, but customer satisfaction ratings are up 800%. We have species requesting extended layovers specifically to participate in what they call tournament play. The mineraloids have established something called a League Standings Board, and 3 separate species have submitted requests to construct permanent recreational facilities." Quell's thermal signature flickered between confusion and alarm. "And profits?" "That's the strange part, sir. Profits are actually up. Species are spending significantly more time on the station, purchasing goods they don't need, and paying for services that provide no functional benefit. The humans have introduced something called souvenir shopping that appears to involve acquiring items specifically because they serve no practical purpose. This phenomenon was being repeated throughout the galaxy. Human influence was spreading not through conquest or colonization, but through something far more insidious. Fun was becoming profitable. The logical hegemony of Arcturus had been the first to recognize the economic implications. Their initial analysis of human recreational activities had dismissed them as inefficient resource allocation, but follow-up studies revealed that populations with access to recreational opportunities showed increased creativity, improved problem-solving abilities, and higher overall productivity. More disturbing, they seemed to work harder specifically because they were enjoying themselves. Counselor Vresh stood before the emergency session of the Galactic Council, his crystalline form reflecting the nervous energy that filled the chamber. His people had been among the first to embrace human recreational concepts, and the results had been both impressive and terrifying. "The data is conclusive," he announced to the assembled delegates. "Societies that incorporate human-style recreational activities show measurable improvements in almost every metric we use to evaluate civilization success. Scientific innovation increases by an average of 40%. Social cooperation improves dramatically. Even military effectiveness has shown unexpected enhancement." "Explain the military implications," demanded General Korth of the Rigelian Defense Force, whose own troops had been requesting permission to organize something called war games that apparently involved mock combat scenarios designed for entertainment rather than training. "It appears," Vresh continued reluctantly, "that species who learn to play together also learn to fight together more effectively. Human recreational activities seem to build trust, communication skills, and tactical creativity. Our joint training exercises with human forces have resulted in the most effective military units in galactic history." A murmur of concern rippled through the chamber. The idea that fun could enhance military capability challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of combat effectiveness. But the real alarm came from Counselor Thex of the Archive Authority. "The situation is more complex than simple performance improvements," Thex reported, his harmonic voice creating resonance patterns of anxiety throughout the chamber. "We are observing fundamental changes in species psychology. Populations exposed to human recreational concepts are beginning to question the basic premises of their civilizations." "Elaborate," commanded the Council Prime. "They are asking why their societies prioritize efficiency over happiness. They want to know why productivity is considered more important than personal fulfillment. They are demanding explanations for social structures that prioritize function over joy." The implications were staggering. For millions of years, galactic civilization had been built on the assumption that intelligent species naturally evolved toward maximum efficiency and resource utilization. The idea that advanced beings might choose happiness over optimization threatened the philosophical foundation of the entire galactic order. Perhaps, suggested Admiral Zextar, who had become humanity's unofficial advocate on the Council, we should consider that our previous assumptions were incomplete. The suggestion was met with silence that stretched for several uncomfortable minutes. "Admiral," the Council Prime finally responded, "are you suggesting that millions of years of galactic civilization have been fundamentally misdirected?" "I'm suggesting that maybe we've been asking the wrong questions. Instead of asking how to become more efficient, perhaps we should ask how to become more alive." The philosophical debate that followed would have continued for years under normal circumstances. But the galaxy didn't have years. The human influence was spreading too rapidly, and with it came changes that threatened to destabilize the entire galactic order. The crisis reached its peak when humanity made contact with the Eternal Dominion. The Dominion was the galaxy's oldest continuously functioning government, a vast empire that had maintained stability for over 50 million years through strict adherence to the principle of absolute order. Every aspect of Dominion society was regulated, optimized, and controlled. Citizens were assigned roles based on genetic aptitude, resources were distributed according to mathematical formulas, and deviation from established protocols was simply impossible. It was also, by any human measure, a civilization where no one had smiled in recorded history. Captain Sarah Chen received the formal diplomatic invitation with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The Eternal Dominion had requested a cultural exchange, but their communication protocols were so rigid that the invitation itself had taken 3 months to compose and required a 70-page appendix explaining proper behavioral expectations. "They want to understand our social customs," she explained to her senior staff during the mission briefing. "But they've provided a list of activities that are prohibited during our visit. Let's see. No spontaneous behavior, no unscheduled conversations, no activities that lack predetermined outcomes, no expressions of emotion that serve no functional purpose, and absolutely no games." Dr. Jennifer Walsh raised her hand. "Sarah, that list basically prohibits everything that makes us human." "Exactly," Chen grinned. "This should be interesting." What followed was the most challenging diplomatic mission in human history. The Dominion's capital world, Perfectus Prime, was a testament to absolute efficiency. Every building was identical in size and shape, optimized for maximum functionality. Transportation networks moved citizens along predetermined routes at calculated intervals. Even the planet's weather was artificially controlled to maintain constant atmospheric conditions. It was, the human delegation agreed, the most depressing place they had ever seen. Emperor Zorvan. The Eternal received the human delegation in a throne room that had been designed to demonstrate the supremacy of order over chaos. The chamber was perfectly symmetrical, decorated in neutral colors that provided no emotional stimulus, and maintained at atmospheric conditions calculated to promote rational thinking. "Welcome to the Eternal Dominion," Zorvan announced through a voice modulator that eliminated any trace of personal inflection. "You will observe our customs, follow our protocols, and limit your interactions to approved conversational topics." Captain Chen studied the ancient ruler with genuine curiosity. Zorvan was old, older than most civilizations, and had maintained his empire through sheer force of will and absolute dedication to order. He was also, she realized, completely miserable. "Your Majesty," she replied with a respectful bow that still somehow managed to convey warmth. "We're honored by your invitation. We'd love to learn about your society." Learning will be conducted through formal educational presentations. Emotional responses are not required. Of course. But would it be possible to meet some of your citizens? We've found that the best way to understand a culture is through personal interaction. Zorvan's expression didn't change, but his advisor leaned forward to whisper something in his ear. After a brief consultation, the Emperor nodded stiffly. "You will be permitted to observe citizen activities during their designated recreational period." The humans exchanged glances. Recreational period? Citizens receive 17 minutes and 30 seconds of unstructured time each day. This period is carefully monitored to ensure it does not interfere with productive activities. Dr. Walsh felt her heart break a little. What do they do during this time? They sit quietly and prepare for the next day's assignments. That evening, the human delegation was escorted to observe the citizens' recreational period. What they saw was hundreds of beings sitting in perfect rows, maintaining absolute silence, and staring straight ahead with expressions of resigned endurance. It was Captain Chen who broke protocol first. "Excuse me?" she said to a citizen in the front row, a being whose species she didn't recognize, but whose posture suggested deep fatigue. "What's your name?" The citizen looked around nervously, as if the question itself might be dangerous. Citizens are identified by numerical designation. "I am Unit 47-392. "That's your designation. But what do you call yourself? What do your friends call you?" "Friends?" The concept seemed foreign. Citizens do not form personal attachments. Such relationships would create inefficiency in work assignments. Chen sat down next to Unit 47-392, ignoring the shocked gasps from the Dominion escorts. "Where I come from, everyone has a name that belongs just to them, something that makes them unique. If you could choose any name, what would it be?" The citizen was quiet for so long that Chen thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "When I was young, before my assignment designation, I used to imagine being called Melody. I heard the word in an old data file and liked the sound of it." "Melody," Chen repeated warmly. "That's a beautiful name." "It suits you." Something extraordinary happened then. For the first time in perhaps decades, Unit 47,392 smiled. It was a small, hesitant expression, but it transformed her entire appearance. Within minutes, other citizens began moving closer, drawn by something they couldn't quite identify but desperately wanted to experience. Dr. Walsh began talking with a group about their original homeworlds, before they had joined the Dominion. Dr. Webb started describing Earth's seasons and how different weather made humans feel different emotions. By the end of the 17-minute period, the perfect rouse had dissolved into small groups of citizens engaged in animated conversation. They were asking questions about human culture, sharing fragments of suppressed memories about their own pre-Dominion lives, and experiencing something they had almost forgotten existed: curiosity. Emperor Zorvan arrived to find his perfectly ordered society in a state of what he could only classify as chaos. "What have you done?" he demanded, his voice modulator unable to entirely suppress his alarm. "We talked with them," Chen replied simply. "We learned their names." "Names are inefficient. Personal identity creates unpredictable variables in social management." "Your Majesty," Dr. Walsh stepped forward. "May I ask you something? When was the last time you felt happy?" The question hit Zorvan like a physical blow. Happy? The concept was so foreign to his existence that his translation systems struggled to process it. Happiness was an inefficient emotional state that served no productive purpose. He had eliminated it from his empire millions of years ago. He had also, he realized with growing horror, eliminated it from himself. "Happiness is irrelevant," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Chen gestured to the citizens, who were still clustered in their impromptu conversation groups despite the presence of their emperor. "Look at them. They're more animated than they've been in decades, more engaged, more alive. Don't you think they might be more productive if they actually wanted to do their work?" Impossible. Desire is a chaotic force that disrupts optimal resource allocation. Or maybe, suggested Dr. Webb, desire is what motivates people to excel. We've found that humans work hardest when they care about what they're doing. What followed was the longest conversation Emperor Zorvan had engaged in for millennia. The humans didn't try to convince him that his system was wrong. Instead, they asked questions that forced him to examine assumptions he had never questioned. Why was efficiency more important than fulfillment? Why was order preferable to growth? Why was control better than trust? Most importantly, what was the point of a perfect society if no one in it wanted to be alive? The questions haunted Zorvan for days after the humans departed. For the first time in his incredibly long reign, he found himself walking among his citizens instead of observing them through monitoring systems. He listened to their conversations, watched their interactions, and slowly began to see his empire through different eyes. His citizens weren't happy. They were efficient, productive, and perfectly controlled, but they moved through their lives like automatons, going through the motions of existence without any real engagement with life itself. Meanwhile, throughout the galaxy, the human influence continued to spread. Species that had never questioned their social structures were organizing festivals. Governments were implementing policies designed to increase citizen happiness rather than just productivity. Ancient trade routes were being modified to accommodate what species were calling recreational travel. The Crystalline Collective had established the galaxy's first interspecies sports league, featuring competitions that served no purpose other than entertainment. The Rigelian military had introduced music into their training programs after discovering that coordinated singing improved unit cohesion. Even the logical hegemony had begun scheduling regular innovation breaks, where citizens were encouraged to pursue creative projects that had no predetermined utility. But the most dramatic change came from an unexpected source. Emperor Zorvan's first official decree in 5 million years was short and simple. Citizens of the Eternal Dominion are hereby granted permission to choose personal names and form social relationships based on mutual affection rather than administrative efficiency. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Millions of beings who had lived their entire lives as numerical designations suddenly had names again. Melody was among the first to register hers officially, and she quickly became a leader in what citizens began calling the identity movement. Within a year, the most rigidly controlled society in galactic history had transformed into something unprecedented, a civilization that balanced order with joy, efficiency with fulfillment, and control with freedom. The transformation wasn't without challenges. Some citizens struggled with the concept of personal choice after lifetimes of assigned roles. Others found the sudden availability of options overwhelming. But gradually, with guidance from human cultural advisors, the Dominion began to evolve into something that had never existed before. A society that was both functional and fun. Admiral Zexatar received regular reports about these changes with a mixture of amazement and concern. Humanity had accomplished something that should have been impossible. They had convinced an ancient, established civilization to voluntarily abandon its foundational principles in favor of untested concepts like happiness and personal fulfillment. More importantly, it was working. The reformed Dominion showed immediate improvements in innovation, problem-solving, and social cohesion. Crime rates dropped to unprecedented lows, not because of increased enforcement, but because citizens who felt valued and respected had no desire to cause harm. Productivity actually increased as workers who enjoyed their jobs naturally excelled at their tasks. But the real test came when the Dominion faced its first external crisis since the reforms began. The Void Seekers, a nomadic species known for their aggressive expansion and resource raids, had identified the Dominion's border worlds as targets for conquest. Under the old system, Zorvan would have responded with calculated military deployment and efficient resource allocation for extended conflict. Instead, he did something that shocked both his enemies and allies. He invited the Void Seekers to a party. The first annual Galactic Peace Festival was held on the border world of New Hope, formerly designated as Resource Extraction Point 7349. What had once been a sterile mining operation had been transformed into a celebration of interspecies cooperation, featuring games, competitions, cultural exchanges, and the galaxy's largest potluck dinner. The Void Seekers arrived prepared for war and found themselves faced with beach volleyball courts. "What is the meaning of this?" demanded War Chief Scar as his invasion fleet entered orbit around a planet that appeared to be hosting the largest party in galactic history. "It's a festival," Emperor Zorvan explained via communication link, and for the first time in millions of years, his voice carried genuine warmth. "We thought you might be hungry. We've prepared food from 60 different worlds, and there are games if you're interested." "Games?" Scar's confusion was evident even across species and translation barriers. "We came here to conquer your resources." "Why conquer them when you could share them? We've found that cooperation is much more fun than conflict." What happened next became legendary throughout the galaxy. The Void Seekers, a species that had known only conflict and competition, experienced their first taste of unconditional hospitality. They were offered food without payment, invited to participate in activities without obligation, and welcomed without conditions. By the end of the festival, War Chief Scar had learned to play chess, discovered a talent for karaoke, and experienced something his warlike species had never known: friendship. "This is impossible," he confided to Captain Chen during the festival's final evening. "My people are warriors. We take what we need through strength and conquest." "And how's that working out for you?" Chen asked gently. Scar considered the question seriously. His people were strong, feared throughout the galaxy, and successful in their raids. They were also isolated, constantly at war, and driven by needs that never seemed to be satisfied. "We are tired," he admitted. "Always fighting, always moving, always searching for the next target. There is no rest, no joy, no—" He struggled for words. "No reason to fight except that we have always fought. What if there was another way?" The Void Seekers didn't abandon their nomadic lifestyle, but they did abandon their aggressive expansion. Instead of raiding, they became the galaxy's first traveling entertainment troupe, moving from system to system with festivals, games, and celebrations. Their ships, once feared as harbingers of destruction, became welcome sights as symbols of joy and shared experience. As news of the Void Seekers' transformation spread throughout the galaxy, the last holdouts against human influence began to reconsider their positions. If even the most warlike species could find alternatives to conflict, perhaps there was something to humanity's approach after all. The final validation came from an unexpected source: the galactic economy. Trade volume increased exponentially as species began traveling for recreation rather than just resource acquisition. New industries emerged around entertainment, hospitality, and what humans called experience services. Innovation accelerated as creative thinking was valued alongside logical analysis. Most importantly, for the first time in galactic history, the majority of intelligent beings reported being satisfied with their lives. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Curiosity, now serving as humanity's flagship for galactic cultural exchange, watching the completion of construction on the first interspecies amusement park. The massive station, built jointly by 12 different species, featured attractions designed to accommodate the recreational preferences of every known form of intelligent life. "So," Dr. Walsh joined her at the observation window, "how does it feel to have accidentally conquered the galaxy through the power of fun?" Chen laughed, the sound carrying across the ship's communication system and eliciting responses from crew members throughout the vessel. "Jenny, we didn't conquer anything. We just reminded everyone that life is supposed to be enjoyed, not just endured. And the fact that this has fundamentally altered galactic civilization? Maybe civilization needed altering. Maybe the point of intelligence isn't to become more efficient. Maybe it's to become more joyful." As they watched alien children playing zero-gravity tag with human kids in the station's recreational areas, both women reflected on how much the galaxy had changed. Species that had never communicated were now planning joint festivals. Governments that had operated on pure logic were implementing policies based on citizen happiness. Ancient enemies were discovering that they enjoyed each other's company. Humanity had introduced something to the galaxy that no one had realized was missing: the understanding that existence didn't have to be a burden to be optimized, but could be an adventure to be celebrated. And perhaps most remarkably, every species that embraced this understanding discovered that their lives became not just happier, but more meaningful, more creative, and more fundamentally worth living. The galaxy had encountered fun, and as it turned out, fun was exactly what it had been waiting for all along.